Rudolf Steiner's influence, particularly through his indications about education, agriculture and medicine, is increasingly apparent. There are 7 Rudolf Steiner Waldorf schools in India and over 1,000 worldwide, plus communities for those with learning difficulties, as well as hundreds of farmers working with his suggestions of how to not only produce healthier food, but also how to heal the earth in the process. Waldorf schools, biodynamic agriculture, Velida, Demeter, Hauschka, Camp Hill, these names are increasingly familiar all over the world. In South India, I visited a group of small-scale farmers learning about the influence not just of the sun and the moon on plant growth and health, but also of the planets, a reminder of what in many parts of the world is still not totally forgotten. Rudolf Steiner shared this knowledge, in part based on traditional wisdom, in a course of lectures to farmers in Central Europe in 1924, a year before he died. An awareness of the influence of the planetary constellations, and including when you sow what, is also central to biodynamic agriculture, a worldwide movement informed and inspired by that course of lectures, delivered at a time when farmers were already expressing concern about the effect that chemical fertilizers were having on the soil and on the health and quality of their produce.
The beauty of Dr. Rudolf Steiner is that he was not just a philosopher living in a world of ideas and just philosophizing and just thinking. He brought all these ideas to practical human activity, whether it's agriculture, education, medicine, architecture.
Jakes is president of the Biodynamic Association in India and has his own farm, but spends more and more of his time in China and Taiwan, as well as in India, helping small family farms to improve the quality of their land and crops and to survive financially in a culture that has increasingly encouraged farmers to use expensive pesticides and high-yielding, chemically dependent seeds. These seeds have to be purchased each year, bringing an end to the practice of farmers producing their own. Dependency on the multinationals has forced a huge number of Indian farmers into bankruptcy, and many even to suicide. Jakes went on to tell me how many of Steiner's philosophical and spiritual teachings, as well as their practical applications, felt very familiar to people in India, in particular the belief in reincarnation and karma. Where do we come from? Where are we going? Despite the many challenges and seeming setbacks that we may face, the idea that we live and learn and grow through many lifetimes is an ancient teaching. So too, that the universe is alive and has purpose and meaning. This awareness that there is more to reality than meets the eye was simply and imaginatively expressed to me 5,000 miles away from South India, through an encounter at a biodynamic farm in England, on the edge of the Ashdown Forest in Sussex.
There's nothing nasty goes on these raspberries then, yeah?
Nothing at all. The only thing that we put on these raspberries are 2 preparations, something called 500 and 501. 500 is the horn manure preparation and 501 is the silica preparation. And they're sprayed at the beginning of the season and then when there's fruit coming.
Is the whole thing about the sort of planets and raspberries, I mean, that obviously makes sense to you, does it?
Does it make sense? No, it doesn't make sense. But bringing in the forces of the whole of the cosmos and the whole of the universe absolutely makes sense. I don't understand the minutiae of it, and I don't need to understand. But what I need to really know and believe is that I'm not alone in this garden working to grow all this. And that's for me is what's important.
Liz is in charge of the fruit and vegetables at Plawhatch Farm. Her sense that she's not alone echoes Steiner's many references to an invisible realm that supports and sustains not only the life of plants and animals, but humanity itself. What was very visible at Plorhatch Farm on the day we filmed was a group of 9-year-olds from the Steiner Waldorf School in Brighton. Farming is one of the subjects on the curriculum for Class 3 in all Steiner schools. In charge of the dairy herd at Plorhatch is Tom Ventham.
For me, I've come into biodynamics quite late on in life. Okay, I was brought up in a very different way. And,
but in agriculture?
In agriculture, very much so. Brought up on a farm. And I've had a lot of inspiration from working in Africa. And it was while I was in Africa that I came across the whole biodynamic movement. And what it's done for me is really encouraged me to look within myself and within the farm, and rather than look outward, because I think all through my life I've been sort of conditioned to look outwards, look at production and look at what's actually materially happening. Whereas what I've discovered is that if you actually look within and make sure that sits comfortably within oneself and within your heart, then everything that comes out is going to be just fine. And I think that's what the whole biodynamic movement has meant to me. It's changed me to look inwards.
So you mean you're a better farmer as a result, then?
Yeah, but I used to measure milk yields, but I don't now. It's a disaster. Because if you measure a milk yield, then you're thinking that actually that's a measure of success. It's not about milk yield, it's about the animal as a whole. And so it's changed the way I farm into a much more qualitative approach rather than a production approach.
As with all biodynamic farms, Plorhatch is farmed organically, natural feed for the animals and no pesticides or artificial fertilizers on the land. And the emphasis is on diversity, not just cows, not just raspberries. There's also a cheese-making operation at Plorhatch Farm, and as a community-supported enterprise, they have over 600 loyal and committed customers who own shares in the venture. Plorhatch's milk and yoghurt are sold in their farm shop, along with Lizzie's fruit and vegetables. I asked one of the apprentices what she made of Steiner's ideas.
They're hugely far out. And it's very difficult to actually read a book that's written by Steiner. Everybody I've met struggles with it. And even when you can manage to read the book, to accept his ideas is another challenge as well, because, yes, some of them come across as quite loopy. And I don't think he wanted anybody to blindly accept what he was saying. I think you've got to try things out and just see if it sits well with you. And also adapt it. I think we need to be flexible as well. And yeah, feel our way through the work, you know? Work with the preparation, spray the fields, and also personalise it, you know, put your own love into it at the end of the day. I don't think there's any point in just like reading the book and just using it like a manual. And he had some inspiring ideas, and it's quite difficult to understand why we spray the fields with these bizarre combinations of ingredients. But you give it a try, trust it, you know, have some faith that maybe it's going to help. And then see if it works. I think we've got to be open and flexible.
To be open and flexible and to trust. A young Dutch apprentice is doing just that. For an hour he will stir this substance, which contains a preparation known as 500, cow manure that has been buried in a cow horn for 6 months over the winter, when the crystalline forces in the earth are at their strongest and therefore most receptive to cosmic influences. Through rhythmic stirring, so Steiner indicated, forces within the preparation are released into the water, which, when sprayed on the land, has a dynamic effect on the soil and therefore on plant growth. Cattle, along with pigs, sheep and poultry, are the focus at Tablehurst Farm, the sister enterprise to Plorhatch. Between them they farm on 700 acres, most of which are held by a land trust and not privately owned, thereby guaranteeing long-term security. Steiner frequently warned against treating land, and indeed capital and labour, as a commodity. At Tablehurst and Plawhatch, they grow their own feed and produce enough manure and compost to fertilise both farms. The mixture of animals, crops, fruit and vegetables enhances, it seems, the health and well-being of the farm as a whole. Peter Brown is one of the farmers at Tablehurst. On biodynamic farms, cows keep their horns, which are seen as an important sense organ, helping to give each animal an awareness of its surroundings and of its own metabolism and identity.
If a cow doesn't have its horns, it can't actually feel anything. It doesn't know who it is as an individual. And that's why most farmers take the horns off, so they can keep more animals in, but also it takes away the cow's sense of who she is. Then that cow won't mind standing so close to each other like that. But these cows, they need about 2 or 3 metres around each other. If anybody goes into that space, they don't like it at all. So they're very strong individuals. Look at Orchid here. Nobody's going to go near her. Even if we go near her, she wants to get out of the way. But that's a very nice thing. Because if she's nice and individual, she has a very good immune system because she knows who she is. She feels good about herself and she knows what she's doing. Nothing can really touch her. Nothing can go wrong with her. But if we take her horns off, it's a bit like having lobotomy. Suddenly she doesn't know who she is. Actually, she doesn't really care who she is. She's lost one of her major sense organs. And who cares? Who cares what I eat? Who cares who I stand next to? And in fact, I don't need to last very long. And that's how most of our dairy cows are today, just like that. Whereas she should go on until she's about 15 years old, easily. Very strong. Never use any drugs on her, never spray any chemicals on her at all, never do anything to her. Maybe just trim her feet, and that's it. And she'll give very, very nice milk. Very strong milk, full of vitality.
Clearly, Tom's cows are not going to tolerate being herded into conditions that treat them as pure milk-producing machines. And on the subject of their horns, it had already been explained to me in India how there exists a close connection between the complex digestive system of a cow and its horns, a memory of which is still retained in the horn even after the animal is no longer alive. Hence the use of horns as receptacles for the 2 biodynamic preparations, 500 and 501. At Tablehurst Farm, the 500 preparation, known as horn manure, having been stirred rhythmically for an hour, is now sprayed on the ground in spring and will continue to be applied during the summer. In the meantime, below the ground and throughout the summer are buried another batch of horns containing powdered silica. This substance, the preparation known as 501 or horn silica, is likewise stirred and then sprayed over the growing crops to regulate their receptivity to light and thereby improve their health, quality and vitality. In a nearby field, chamomile flowers are being picked by Peter Brown and his team. Chamomile is one of 6 plants, each carrying a particular function that is specially prepared and then introduced into the compost heaps, along with nettles, oak bark, yarrow, dandelion and valerian, to enhance and regulate the process of fermentation.
Yeah, well, we're happy after these 3 months of drought, aren't we? Yeah.
Drought, yeah, oh yeah.
Even the rye behind us is not as high as it should be, is it? And that's because of the drought.
There are 12 people employed on Tablehurst Farm, plus 3 apprentices and 3 people with learning difficulties. I asked Peter Brown about the viability of biodynamic agriculture.
We're doing quite a lot of processing of products and selling direct to the customer. And that is what helps make it viable, and also gets a direct relationship with the customer and us as a group of farmers. And because we're doing the extra processing together with the farming, like we butcher the meat and sell it on the farm, and we make the wheat or the rye into flour, and we sell it to the local bakery, and that sort of doubles the price. It's ironic because, you know, there's so much, proportionately it feels like there's a lot of work goes into producing it, and then all you do is put it through the mill and you double your price. But that's what you have to do, though, to make it viable.
Driving the tractor is David Junghans. He attended a Steiner Waldorf school in his native Germany, then trained in conventional agriculture before coming to England to Emerson College to study biodynamics. I asked him what he understood by this word force, the idea that there is something invisible at work in the substances that make up the phenomenal world.
I think everyone has the experience of forces, hard forces, of love, for example, or of any kind of emotions. But they are not visible. It's only the physical carrier, actually, the human being, that makes it visible. And so it is in nature. Potassium is a carrier for a particular force, and so on and so on. So that's how I understand forces. Forces stand behind matter, and actually matter carries these forces into the physical world.
During my visit to what was clearly a thriving and truly mixed farm enterprise, someone remarked that old MacDonald seems to have got it right.
Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O, and on that farm he had a dog, E-I-E-I-O, with a quack quack here and a quack quack there, here a quack, there a quack, everywhere a quack quack. Old MacDonald had a farm.
Class 1 at the South Devon Rudolf Steiner School. Only now, aged 6 to 7, are the children starting formally to learn to read and write. And like much of the teaching in Steiner schools, music and art are incorporated into the lessons throughout childhood.
Here a bar, there a bar, everywhere a bar.
The South Devon School is one of 35 Steiner Waldorf schools in Britain. The first Waldorf school was founded by Steiner in 1919 at the request of Emil Molt, owner of the Waldorf cigarette factory in Stuttgart, who wanted an education for the children of his employees that prepared them for life in its fullest sense. And life in its fullest sense means educating hands and heart as well as head. Until the children go into class 1 around the age of 7, the emphasis is on play, imitation and on rhythm. Baking on Monday, painting on Wednesday, an expedition on Thursday and so on. And on stories which are told rather than read by the teacher. And Steiner's picture of child development is not only of children growing up and thereby learning the ways of the world, but also of children growing down, bringing into life their own unique biographies, as he saw it from many lifetimes. And this needs time to build a strong and firm foundation so that each child can not only then face the world as it is, but also develop the strength of character to maybe change it. Songs and ring games are another important ingredient in the early years. Ideally, dexterity in their bodies will gradually translate into dexterity in how they think and create. Much of what the children do, not just in the kindergarten, is designed to counteract what is increasingly recognized in the modern world as an erosion of childhood. A concern that extends far beyond the Waldorf school movement. As at the Brighton Steiner School, these 9-year-olds are also not just studying farming, but actually doing it as part of what is called main lesson. One particular subject taught for the first 2 hours every morning over a period of 3 or 4 weeks. Around this age, most children start to take a new interest in the world around them, whilst also experiencing a certain separation from that world. Now they begin to study science, and in mathematics the concept of fractions.
Still waiting for science. Now, who remembers which are those potatoes from the ones we planted? Are they early? Only early? Really? First early, thank you. What else have we got here?
Main crop.
Main crop? Yeah, what else? Lily May?
Early second.
Phrase that differently?
Second early.
Thank you. Who can show me blight in this potato? Lily, show something to me. Can you see? I can see from where I am. Quite right. Yeah? Every digger should have two other ones working together. So should be groups of three. A digger and two collecting the potatoes. The plants should all be brought back here, please. Yeah, girls? That's perfect. No, that's fine. So one on this side. You are too many here.
Well, they really seem to be enjoying themselves. I thought children weren't meant to like gardening.
They like gardening very much because they can see the end result. So they've been involved in the ploughing of this field, well, spreading the muck, the ploughing of the field, which was done by horses. So they actually pulled the plough. So they had, what is that?
When can we see the lamb?
Soon. Yeah?
Oh, that's a big one.
How many?
7.
Very gentle.
9.
Whoa, wow, look at that.
14. 16.
They respond very well to the activities we propose. It's the practical ones there. Yes, let's do it. And there's a real enthusiasm that comes from them.
Where are you from?
I'm from Brazil. I'm from Brazil, yeah.
So there are Waldorf schools in Brazil too?
There are Waldorf schools in Brazil.
Yeah.
But I wasn't connected to schools there. I was connected to the biodynamic impulse, but not to schools.
Yeah. Here you're doing both.
That's right, yeah, sort of bringing them together, really. Yeah.
Everyone at the Grange lives in family-sized households, and the land is worked biodynamically. In charge of the gardens is Tony Carlton.
You weed and ridge at the same time. All right. But only part ridge, not fully ridge. Okay. Okay, so it's just a bit, because each time that you do it, it sort of accumulates. That way we beat the weed much better.
Tony compared Ian's vortexing of the preparation to breathing. Judy and Jade breathe, the cows breathe, the earth breathes, and so too, through stirring rhythmically, does this substance. Tony Carlton's armillary sphere is his equivalent of those planets on sticks laid out on an Indian farm.
Shortest daylight hours.
A clear, if squeaky way to observe how the sun moves throughout the year in relation to the 12 signs of the zodiac.
This sun line, as it goes through each constellation, has a different quality. So where the sun is at any particular time through the year, let's go to Easter, where we've already gone from Capricorn, Aquarius, and we've come to the fishes, we've come to Pisces. If we can imagine that that accumulation of energy is happening from Christmas time to Easter, we start entering spring. Now, in the conventional farming, you will find that all the farmers will actually sow their maize or their silage and this, that and the other when the sun is in Aries. Now they don't know it's in Aries, but Aries is a warmth sign. And it's an accumulation of energy that has made itself available from inside the earth, increased by the added daylight hours, and Aries brings warmth, which is when the farmers sow their maize.
Tony, when you say Taurus is an earth sign, I mean, what do you actually mean by that?
Well, you've got four main qualities: earth, light, water, and warmth. They're the four energies that you're working from. So most people who have a birthday, I don't know many people who haven't got some sort of birthday, that they will say, oh, I'm an earth sign. Yeah. In the plant world, that earth sign also means root. So your root vegetables. Yeah. With a water sign, you mean your leaf vegetables. With an air sign, it's normally your flowering impulse. And then with a warmth sign, you have your fruit. Yeah. So the four earth, water, fire, and air are broken down to root, leaf, flower, and fruit. So I need to remember what a plant is. So a lettuce is very happy with Pisces, but a bean is not, because a bean would be much happier with Aries, because if I sow it in Pisces, it's just going to sit there and wait and wait. And then once it goes to Aries, you realize that actually it will start doing something.
While Tony sprayed his newly stirred magic on the garden, I asked one of his apprentices what he made of all this and what he understood by our title, The Challenge of Rudolf Steiner.
One thing that is very much how people do things today is that, like, people don't really want to spend time with something unless they already know that it's right. Like, I think there's something in The Lord of the Rings where he describes hobbits, and he says hobbits only have books that tell you about things they already know. That's very much true about, I think that's very much true about the way people today relate to truth. Like, they don't, like, I don't know, left punky people, they read like the books written by left punky people because they know there's only things in them that they anyway agree on. And I think when you try to read Rudolf Steiner, usually what I find you will find that you need to open yourself to something that you do not yet know, or like you need to make an effort without knowing for sure. Like, it takes trust.
As well as the Waldorf School in Hawthorne Valley, there's a 400-acre biodynamic farm, an active youth group called Think Outward, a bakery and shop, and a kitchen garden from which vegetables are trucked twice a week to Union Square Green Market in New York City. Coordinating this whole Hawthorne Valley operation, an attempt to tackle our day-to-day needs in a healthier and saner way, is Martin Ping.
There's a lot that doesn't seem to make too much sense anymore, and yet we've grown up with it. We've created it. Human beings have created the system we're in now. So there's something in that we are challenged by, because it's not like it was necessarily just imposed from outer space or something. We did this. So how do we find our way out of it? If we're beginning to see the cracks and we're beginning to feel like it's not meeting us at a very, very deep human level, then how do we find our way back out? I think Steiner really had a lot of very fine indications that provide a bit of a roadmap for that. And it's not just Steiner. I mean, there's obviously many, many ways in which people are approaching our modern predicament.
Agriculture is certainly one of our modern predicaments. And already back in 1924, when Steiner gave a course of lectures to farmers in Central Europe, there was concern about the effect that chemical fertilizers were having on the soil and on the quality of the food we eat. The importance of organic farming is increasingly recognized. Steiner's biodynamic method goes further in that the preparations used on the land are designed not only to enhance the quality of the produce, but also to heal the earth in the process. And a recognition of the role that not only the sun and moon, but also the planets play in plant growth and health determines when you plant what. I asked the farmer in charge at Hawthorne Valley for his reaction to our title, The Challenge of Rudolf Steiner.
I think his basic challenge, I would think he was so far, I mean, I think the picture of agriculture that he gives is going to be valid for hundreds and hundreds of years still, for us to really grasp it. And then certainly the real challenge for all of us is develop the insight and develop the capacities to really see what he described. You know, it's not good enough to just be able to recount it. We'll have to be able to see it.
To develop insights and capacities of their own is what these two modern-day alchemists are trying to do in this Californian garage. Their task, to make biodynamic preparations based on indications by Steiner that are not only an effective alternative to chemical and potentially harmful substances that are marketed worldwide, but are also more appropriate to the soil and climate of California and the tropics than those used in Western Europe. I asked Dennis Kloczek to what extent Steiner was tapping into something that we knew in the past and have forgotten.
Rudolf Steiner didn't appear just out of the blue. There's an old saying, genius never escapes its age. So he was a genius, and he brought the best elements from the ancient traditions together and synthesized them in a scientific context. That's why his work is called spiritual science. He felt it was really important that the scientific context be recognized by spiritually minded people, because he grew up at a time in his development when spiritism and Ouija boards and table tapping and seances, that was the way people got access to spirit. And he inherited the mantle of theosophy, and that was part of their lore. And what he said was, no, it has to be made in the same way that we make science. However, on the other side of science is this death rationale force that can't imagine life forces and beings as spiritual beings. That's a whole other dimension, and they're separated now. And so it's necessary to bring those two together in order for science to be redeemed, and in order for spiritual work to move into the future rather than just be stuck on what we inherited from the past. It has to move into the future, but the scientific revolution is not random. It's not an anomaly. It's a reality. So it's not going to go away. So the scientific worldview is not going to go away. So we can't just go out and hug trees and talk about fairies and hope that that's going to go somewhere. Even if that's the perception that we have, that has to be grounded in reason. So it's both. It's an inheritance from the past, and if you read Paracelsus and Basil Valentine and the alchemists, you'll see everywhere in their work is this threads that Rudolf Steiner was picking on and pulling forward, and yet with his cosmology and his rational training in science, he could move it further.
Dennis Kloczek teaches consciousness studies at this college near Sacramento. His colleague, Matthias Baker, a fellow researcher, is consultant to a number of biodynamic vineyards in California. When Dennis referred earlier to his preparations as medicine for the earth, I asked him why the earth needed medicine. If we left it alone and stopped spraying it with chemicals, wouldn't it be perfectly happy?
No. If we left it alone, it would be very lonely, because it's our mother, and she says to us all the time, You haven't called home in a while. You're only using my bank account to live. So you need to love me and nurture me and feed me with medicines, because I'm sick from your neglect. They say in esoteric circles, if you don't have the organ of perception, if you don't actually work on yourself to perceive in the proper way, you just see the world as it is, not as it could be. Rudolf Steiner could see the world as it could be, not as it was or as it is even now. He saw the world as it could be, and that's a lonely path. It's a very lonely path. For me, what is unique about the work of Rudolf Steiner, what's inspired my life about it, is that it's not just a tradition. He threw down the glove and said, you have to do something with this.
The Benziger family have been doing something with this land for over 30 years. Biodynamic wine is becoming highly prized, not just here in California, but across the world. And like all biodynamic farms, this enterprise avoids the modern trend for monocrops. Alongside the vines, there are animals and a great variety of plants and herbs that help regulate the insect population and balance the farm as a totality, avoiding the need for chemicals and artificial fertilizers. They call it the insectary.
Basically, it propagates with bugs, then they sort it out. We have some good bugs and some bad bugs, then they slug it out here. And hopefully what we do is we have a balance, so that they're in here eating the plants and eating each other instead of going out there and eating the grapevines. Because if we were monocropping, then we put a huge bullseye in the back of that grapevine, because the only thing that's green is that grapevine, so every bug is going to fly and eat that. Here, we have a wide expanse, so there's a lot of things on the menu, not just the grapevines.
And the entire 85 acres are treated with the organic preparations that all biodynamic farmers use.
So we're talking about
Chris Benziger and his family have farmed here in the Sonoma district since the 1980s.
When we first moved out here, we were very much conventional farmers because we didn't know any better. In conventional farming, I kind of call it the spray and pray method. For every disease or every bug, you had a spray out there. And for every lack of nutrients in the vineyard, you had a fertilizer that you put down, chemical one. So we did that. And since this place was left vacant for 50 years, it was in wonderful state. It was a beautiful piece of property. But we slowly killed it with spraying these pesticides. And I remember being a small kid running through here, and it was a verdant garden. And then every year it would die a little bit, until eventually, in the mid-'80s, it was a green desert. The only thing that was green were the canopies of the grapevines, nothing else. And the only sound I heard weren't insects, but the wind. It was pretty much a dead place, and the ground was crunchy. It was hard, if not pulverized. And so we had erosion issues, and then worst of all, the quality of the wine was diminishing. We were really putting scars on this land that we couldn't heal. We realized very quickly we had to do something. And so in the early 90s, my brother had a book on biodynamics that he had toted around his whole life, and the book kind of jumped out at him. At the same time, he met this wonderful guy by the name of Alan York, who was kind of the biodynamic guru out there, and the two got together and formed a great friendship, and we started to, in 1994, started to bring in biodynamic practices here, and it took us about 6 years, but in the year 2000, we were certified, the first winery in the Sonoma-Napa area to be certified by Demeter as a biodynamic winery. And this place changed radically, going from this green desert to this beautiful piece of property that you see here today. It's gorgeous. It's alive on many levels.
And people like Matthias then have been advising you, yeah?
Oh, Matthias and Alan have been instrumental in us on how to understand this piece of property and unlock the secrets of farming biodynamically.
Chris and Matthias went on to tell me that essentially the vine doesn't want to be alone. I asked them if that was true of plants altogether. Is monoculture against nature?
I personally think it absolutely is.
Yeah, and we see that because nature always fills the gaps in terms of where the balance needs. So you'll see disease pressure, funguses, or different insects that come in to kind of help break down that monoculture in a sense. And there's evidence there that shows that nature recognizes it as an imbalance.
Chris, you've got this wonderful visitor centre. People come here and look around. And what's the public's reaction to biodynamics?
First is wow. I didn't realize all that went on to make a bottle of wine. That's the first thing that they kind of say. And then they go, a lot of them say, well, that's how my grandfather farmed, or that's how my old uncle back in the old land farmed. So there's this natural kind of understanding of it, of how it should be. And then there's this kind of, wow, I wish we could do that. You could see everybody wants to get a little dirt under their fingernails when they come here. And they understand that it's a very complicated system on one hand, but also an extremely simple system on the other, because it's following Mother Nature. The idea is we are so inbred to hang on to the steering wheel and drive Mother Nature. It's really hard to take your hands off the steering wheel and let Mother Nature drive.
But there's a lot more to what you're doing than what's called organic agriculture, isn't there? I mean, it brings in this whole element of the planets. I mean, what do people think about that?
Well, there is a little element there where people think, whoa, that's crazy. But it's funny because when you explain to them rhythms and things like that, then they get it. But when you just say cow horn and biodynamics, they think, what the heck's a cow horn for?
But biodynamics is more than just cow horns filled with cow manure that are buried in the earth for 6 months over the winter before spraying the substance that's created onto the land. What underlies Steiner's picture of nature, and indeed the whole phenomenal world, including ourselves, is an invisible realm of beings, some more evolved than we are, some less so, that support and sustain life in its fullest sense. I asked Chris how his fellow Americans related to the idea that what they call God is intimately connected to what surrounds us in our daily lives, and not only to a heaven that is somewhere else. That there is, in other words, only one world.
In the States, we have no problem with religion, okay? You know, with this God-fearing and the Holy Spirit. But those same people that go to church on Sunday have the hardest time understanding natural spirits, the rhythms of nature that, you know, their God supposedly brings here. They don't see that part of it, these natural systems. So it's very hard for people to, they understand religion, but they're not spiritual in the sense that they don't follow what's happening naturally right underneath their noses. Instead, they want to have a chemical package tell them that this is better than actually following a natural rhythm, which I don't understand, because the beauty is right here. This piece of property is the best church in the world when you see it in action. You have to believe that there's some higher order when you walk around and see what's happening here. You don't need to walk into a temple or a church or a mosque to see that.
I think nature is very wise, but it is not free. We are not very wise, but we are free. So giving ourselves in the freedom that we carry to nature in a certain way, that's the preparations. That's grinding up a silica crystal to bring it in a gravity condition to a levity condition so it becomes active again to the rhythms. That is our work. But it's the wisdom that is in nature that teaches us how to do that. So I'm not saying that we're wiser than nature. No, the creative. If I was to try to build a plant, it would not happen.
It wouldn't work out too well.
It wouldn't work out too well. So that's what I'm saying is there's a language, there's a script in there that is amazing.
Matthias went on to suggest that our challenge is to reconnect to nature and to the earth in a way that is sacred, but sacred in a new way. And that for him, the essence of Steiner's message to farmers is that the work they do on the land needs to be accompanied by the work they do on themselves, a message that could apply to all of us, whatever we do. This young man is at work 3,000 miles from the Benziger winery in California, but still in the USA. Tucked away in New England is Copiague, a Camp Hill village community for adults with learning difficulties. Gardens, a farm, workshops, a shop and bakery. 230 people live and work here, one of over 100 such communities worldwide. The founders of Camp Hill, refugees from Nazi-occupied Austria, began their work in Scotland in 1939, inspired by the course of lectures on curative education that Steiner gave in 1924. Camp Hill's approach is, and always has been, that behind the mask, behind the damaged and sometimes thwarted lives in which some people find themselves, lives an individuality as whole as every other person, but, like all of us, on their own particular journey. They contribute to the community to the best of their ability, and it is often their vulnerability and openness that helps heal the turmoil that surrounds many so-called normal people. The plants that are used in the majority of Velida's remedies are grown in their own biodynamic garden. The space is deliberately not all geared to production, but to the health and diversity of the environment as a whole, a pond, meadow and trees. For Michael Bate and his assistant Claire Hattersley, the plants, all plants, mirror aspects of the human being, and, if recognized, are there to restore balance and to heal.
The medicines which Rudolf Steiner himself gave us are very fascinating, and when you really study the growth and gestures of the plants that he suggested, they can provide this picture often of the healthy working of, say, the heart or the liver or whatever, or on the other hand provide a mirror of how that organ or that system doesn't work.
This commitment to ponder deeply on Steiner's sometimes challenging indications about our relationship to nature and to our interconnectedness with nature, and to observe what the plant is saying to us, is at the heart of Velida's work. Michael also spoke to me about the challenge of being as fluid and flexible as nature herself, and to recognize that everything, including our own lives, is in process. Nothing is fixed. And like each one of us, every plant has its own unique signature.
We have some plants here that they almost push us away. They don't really want us to interfere too much with the way they grow. They don't really want to respond to us gardening and cultivating them. They would rather be standalone. And there are other medicinal plants that are quite kind of, they don't change too much if we are weeding them and hoeing them. And you get a sense that they are working with us, but there are certain plants that are much more independent, and if we start to fuss them too much, then they're perhaps not so happy.
Like it,
yeah. So we have to respect that as well.
What's your understanding? What's the definition of a weed then?
A plant in the wrong place. I see weeds very differently now since I've worked at
Something that's very difficult to grow if you want it.
Really?
Yeah.
Quite often the plants we're trying to cultivate, sometimes they just turn their nose up. They won't behave themselves like garden plants. They're not predictable. So we'll sow a bed of something, maybe poppies, and they won't come up, but maybe in 3 years' time they'll come up for us. So we have to be a little bit kind of flexible.
I think your plants sound to me more like people.
Yes.
Yes, they are
Yes.
beginning to.